on this hike in foreign worker levy. Essentially, the whole storyline of my article is about elasticity of demand. All right, elasticity of demand for foreign worker. Some industry has a higher elasticity of demand for foreign worker. Essentially, they can do without foreign worker quite easily, and then shift, to employ local workers, or maybe improve in terms of their technology or machineries, and hence reduce their reliance on foreign workers. But some industries, such as construction sector, has a lower elasticity of demand. So in the sense that they are very dependent in terms of process-wise, and also basically some process in productions you can't do without workers, especially foreign workers. But I would like to think about the foreign workers levy as an inherent minimum wage. Think about it carefully. This is the amount that you pay to the government to employ a foreign worker. Okay? So if there is a local worker that is willing to accept a pay that is lower than this foreign worker levy, would you employ the local? Obviously, right? Because there's still a ratio. The government has a ratio of, for example, how many foreign workers to how many local workers to how many foreign workers, right? So you get one more local worker, you actually can employ a few more foreign workers. So in a way, this foreign worker levy is an inherent minimum wage for the economy. Think about it carefully. So if you increase that, actually you are increasing the minimum wage inherent in the economy for all Singaporeans as well. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing is that I did a talk. It's actually a TV program, a Channel 8 TV program called Cai Zhen Mian Mian Guan. It was telecast last Thursday together with Minister Gan Kim Yong. I had a in-depth discussion with him with regards to the impact of this foreign worker levy on inflation. Indeed, there will be some short-term impact. Inflation is rising. Latest number is 5.5%. MAS raised their forecast for the full year to 3 to 4, but we believe, in DBS, we believe that it's going to be higher than what they have predicted. But that aside, there will be companies would have a tendency to actually pass on this higher labor cost to consumer. Yes, indeed. But if the industry is competitive enough, all right? If the industry is competitive enough, then it will be more difficult for companies to actually pass on this higher cost to consumer. Because if he does that, he'll lose business. And the other guy, for example, if you are able to upgrade your productivity such that you can increase your output. Increase output means increase revenue. All right? And if you can upgrade your machinery or through some changes in your processes, reduce the reliance on labor, and hence lower your labor cost, in the process maintaining your profit margin. All right? You can actually effectively lower or even maintain your current price. So while your competitor is still suffering from the impact of high foreign worker levy, so they have to actually jack up their price, you can maintain your price, and hence you become more competitive. So if there is competition, then the impact into inflation, the transmission, the pass-through into inflation will be less. And furthermore, I think just now I mentioned that recently we've seen inflationary pressure picking up from all fronts. It's not just labor costs, property prices, food prices, oil, fuel prices, everything is picking up from all fronts. But from an economist's perspective, we look at this current inflationary pressure as a cyclical issue. It is not a structural issue yet. All right? Although the change in policy would have an impact on the structure of the economy, and hence we could see a higher medium-term inflation. In fact, historical inflation in Singapore is 1.5%. But I think, given the recent changes over the last few years, inflation in the longer term would probably average about 2%. But this recent pickup, up to a recent high of 5.5%, is cyclical. In the second half of the year, based on our prediction, we also agree with government view that it would actually subside, it would ease off, and then continue to ease off into 2012, unless something happens again, particularly in Asia. So, based on this kind of scenario, I think the current concern about inflation, indeed, there are some concerns, but it's not going to last forever.
Thanks, and I hope that is indeed the fact. Moving on from productivity and foreign worker levy to what Mr. Samilum alluded to earlier, let's look at tax. And foreign tax pooling credit mechanism. Let's jump into that, and with a more sort of a direct and open question. If the objective of the government is to get more money into Singapore, why not just have an exemption of foreign service or foreign income and say all foreign income remitted into Singapore is exempt? We did that in 2009 when there was a recession, when there was a temporary liberalization of foreign income into Singapore. Why have this mechanism of tax credits and trying to restrict it or relying on source to source, etc.? Why not exempt the whole thing?
Well, I like to look at it from two angles. One, I think we share with all audience here from a selfish angle. Especially if you are a tax consultant, never ask for exemption. Because our fees will be reduced by half. It becomes so simple. Don't ask for it. If anything, ask it to be more complicated. So our clients will come and approach us for advice. Now, that aside, we must also be mindful we have a lot of treaties. So if we completely exempt foreign income, there is very little leverage when we start negotiating for new treaties with our treaty partners. Because they can stand firm and say, no need to give you reduced withholding tax, because in any case, you don't need the credit. You exempt everything. So from that angle, it's not really very good. And from a pooling standpoint, we are already recognizing that certain income is taxed at lower rate, but we can pool it. But over the break, I was talking to Julian. In fact, the ministry can be more aggressive to say, well, when we have excess, why don't we allow the excess to be carried forward? Then it solves the issue as well, that we don't have to perfectly time it, but we can bring it in to the extent that we have excess, we can carry forward. But bearing that in mind, we have come a long way from a time before group relief. We had group relief, we have carryback of losses, now we have pooling of foreign tax credits. So from the corporate standpoint, we have actually evolved quite quickly and, to me, very attractively. So my personal opinion, don't make it too simple.
I would agree with that. Again, from a selfish standpoint. And coming, Gillian, from your perspective, from an EDB perspective and policy-making perspective, I've seen the trend happening, with most of the tax incentives that are coming through. Even now, in this year's budget, you've seen the GTP with a slight change, but all of it with a sunset clause. As the finance minister said, that the sunset clause essentially lets us examine the effectiveness of the clause and the incentive. But do you think companies and clients who are willing to look at all these on a long-term basis, which is 10 years, 15 years, and wanting to make investments in areas on a long-term basis, would they get threatened by the fact that there is a sunset clause?
Yeah, I think you've observed correctly. Any of the tax incentives that has been introduced over the past few years, or any enhancement to existing tax incentives, bring about the introduction of a sunset clause. So sometimes, maybe from EDB's perspective, I also get a little bit frightened which incentive I want to enhance. But jokes aside, this really is part and parcel of the government wanting to actually put in place very systematic approach to reviewing what incentive schemes that are in our toolkit. And this is important because from a governance perspective, internal to Singapore, as well as from an international perspective, how do we actually defend and actually engage our international trading partners and even organizations such as WTO when they actually look at our suite of tax incentives. The sunset clause itself just means that it puts a timeline to review of the incentive. And if you look at our track record, a lot of times, I don't remember seeing that many situations where the incentives were actually taken away. In fact, most of the time it comes back stronger with enhancements with it. And that is testimony to the fact that I think we take the approach of not introducing incentives at a whim. And once we introduce an incentive, it is something that it is in place, and we feel that on a sustainable basis, if it's still relevant to the context it was introduced, and or any enhancements to adapt it to the current situation or business models is necessary, then we'll make that change. And it instills that sort of discipline within the government agencies also to actually consider really where there are incentives that are no longer useful really. I mean, when the take-up rate is not there and business models have moved away from, the use of such incentives, I think that is where we don't have to shy away from taking those away and keeping those that really mean much more to us. I think from a company's perspective, for a foreign investor, this is something that we similarly communicate, because if you're completely new to Singapore, you may not know that the process in Singapore is this way. So this is where ADB has had that communication to say that it's not for purposes of wanting to take away incentives when it's sunset, but really to actually give everybody a chance to say what needs to be enhanced when sunset comes along, and then really think about how we can make it better. Our track record shows that that has been the case for most of our incentives reaching sunset.
Well, I just want to add on something. Now, I always tell people, taxpayers always complain about tax. When we pay $1, it's $1 too much. And for investors, they want the longest incentive ever. And I have a lot of encounters with MNCs who come in. So they say, well, 5 years is not enough. We need 10 years. And then when we sit down and say, well, before we do that, we have to detail down our 5-year projection. Say, you must be joking. How to project 5 years? I can't even see beyond 2 years. Then what are they talking about? They want 10 years? Honestly, in the evolving business environment, to me, 5 years is long enough. And definitely, we work with EDB a lot. If your investments are very substantial, they're prepared to grant up to 10 years incentive. But the issue really is with a client. Can they do a 10-year projection? The answer is no. They struggle to do a 5-year projection.
I think Mr. Samilung is complete, and I'm finished. Coming back to, I've been having a lot of conversations and discussions with people around, and to my mind, I'm unable to get together two basic situations. One is on one spectrum of it, there is the focus of increasing productivity, which means automation, innovation, etc. On the other spectrum of it is we have an aging population, where procreation is becoming difficult. Even with incentives and cash incentives, it's becoming difficult. So we have a set of population which, if everything goes as per plan, you have complete automation on one side, and you have a set of population which might be facing unemployment. How does the government address that in future?
I believe this question is directed to me.
To everyone.
Okay. Aging population, this is something that I think all of us are well aware of. That dependency ratio is becoming higher. That means for everyone working adults, you are showing more and more on your shoulder in terms of supporting the aged population in Singapore. Full automations will lead to unemployment? I don't think so. I mean, come on. Let's be realistic. We don't live in a robotic, era yet. Maybe, another 100 to 200 years down the road. But I'm an economist. I can only look maybe for the next few years. But I don't foresee that in the near future. Not in our lifetime for sure. So I don't think this upgrade towards automations would actually, increase unemployment. In fact, I think this is necessary with an aging population because you have a decreasing, you have in terms of the percentage of working adults, it's getting lesser and lesser because your population is aging. So therefore, you no longer can afford to be labor intensive, which is why you have to go into automations, go into innovation and productivity. And I think this is also one issue, which I have discussed with Minister Gan as well. In fact, this is a concern for the government in the longer term, which is why in this budget they set aside 3.4 billion for long-term social investment, top up to the various assistance funds such as the Elder Care Fund, ComCare Fund, Medi Fund, so on and so forth. Essentially, it is to help, to ease the pain of aging populations, and also to reduce the financial burden of the next government and the various terms of government down the road. So I would expect, in fact, they started doing this, just over the last few years, and I think they were going to do more and more as the population continued to age, setting aside more funds, for long-term social investments, and also in terms of, improving birth rate-wise. Well, I mean, Singapore, we like to be first, but when it comes to, sometimes being first may not be a good thing, especially in birth rate. I think we are among one of the lowest in the world, okay, based on 2010 birth rate, 1.16 or 1.19, around that. It's certainly one of the lowest in the world, and also I think in recent years as well. If I'm not wrong, it may be historical low as well. So actually, I feel that this time around the budget, in terms of area for improvement, I think this is one area that needs to be improved, encouraging, procreation. Over the years, the government has announced some measures, to encourage birth rate, but somehow we haven't seen the impact at all. And for myself, me and my wife, we have been talking about it, but the problem is that we decided to, stop at 2, because my wife she gave birth to a pair of twins last year, and she has this condition that if we try again, there will be chances of multiples. Very high chance. But this time around, I don't see a big baby ang pao. So therefore, that aside, but I think more can be done in terms of encouraging procreations. And in fact, this time around, what we saw was only the Child Development Fund, and also I think some further investment into education to help the low-income families' children, and I think some childcare subsidies as well. But I think at the end of the day, having babies, procreations, I think this is a decision that would have a huge impact on your life. I think those parents down here would be able to understand what I'm saying. For the first time, I understand that, and it's not easy. So it is not just about subsidizing their expenditure. So far, I think most of the policy has focused on subsidizing the cost of bringing out children. But it includes more than that. It's not just money. It's an investment of your time and energy. A lot of sacrifice. So how do you, firstly, quantify those sacrifices into monetary terms such that the government is able to give you enough monetary incentive for you to procreate? I think that is the tricky issue, which is why I think the government is taking a more thorough review of their current policy, and hopefully in the near future they can come up with more effective measures.
My suggestion is that all employers should give procreation leave. Paid procreation leave.
Wanted to comment a part about the productivity and delinking it from employment creation. If you have seen a few trends from the last century, right? Ford Motors, the first one to come out with automotives. Those days you actually came. Ford invented the assembly lines. It's all workers assembling it. Until now, it's fully automated. We do not see a downsizing in terms of the staff population. In fact, they've actually increased. Because by automating, you increase your volume, your output, and therefore you allow more procurement and more ownership in that. And therefore that spins off the entire industry. And we've seen many of that when, I think in the 70s, 80s, when the computers come, the servers that came, and then it became prevalent. People were worried, are we going to come into a decade of entirely automation and where people are being replaced. But we do not see that. In fact, what we have seen is actually a reinvention of a new industry, infocom industry. And with that, it spun off a lot of more professionals and vocation from programmers, software engineers, project managers, even down to network and all the rest. So with that, with automation, it tends to spin off a lot more sectors in industry. It generates employment. And the second part about this, about automation is, we do know that a lot of things cannot be automated. We've actually gone to Japan to look at the automation industry, and we've seen in marine sector how they try to automate it. And true enough, I think they've actually automated their fabrication of marine vessels to be almost like their automobiles. But I think there's one end is I think the sacrifice of this, that they have to do standard sizes, standard configuration. When it comes to customize and something of different varying size, they cannot do that because the automation does not allow them. In Singapore, why our marine sector actually thrive and why our offshore sector had then evolved to become the 80% provider of the oil rigs in the whole world. That's because we tend to do something that's customized in terms of vessels and ships, and because we have the intellectual properties of them. So there's a linkage and a relationship where if you could actually automate, if you can actually have a lot more intellectual properties, it tends to spin off a lot more sectors and the growth in your employment. So I think perhaps there's a D-link between that.
Perhaps the most affected class in all of this is if I would say, the middle income. And they're the ones who I call the sandwiched class, which don't really get any benefits, even if one has to see this budget. If you look at a young family of two who's just married and who are set to start their life together, if their income is above more than 8,000, they can't buy an HDB apartment. They can't buy a condo because the property prices are exorbitant at this point of time. They don't get any tax benefits. They have no children, so they do no childcare benefit. So what's the benefit they get? These are the people who are the most affected. So the government is looking at the lower end of spectrum, where the needy are getting welfare benefits. You're looking at corporates and multinationals who are getting incentives and tax benefits, but the majority of the population doesn't get anything. Any comment on that?
Well, I think I remember during the break you said you've been here 8 years. Not long enough to know our younger population, because our younger population, the moment they're universities, they will quickly register in HDB to join the queue. So even before they start working, they are already in the queue, so they will never breach the $8,000 income band. And that is a starter. And honestly, that is very, very important in Singapore, where everybody can have their own shelter over their head. And that's what the government has done tremendously well. But beyond that, even if the income is more than 8,000, they can go to EC. EC is catering for more than 8,000. So that's okay. And to me, I have friends wanting to upgrade from a 5-room HDB to a condo, but I tell them, you are downgrading, you're not upgrading. Your 5-room HDB is 1,200 square feet, and you go to a condo 900 square feet, and you are upgrading? I can't understand. And you pay a lot more for that. So that, I think, the professional classes, they are comfortable, but honestly, how much more comfortable is never ending. But I'm more concerned with the lowest decile. If we look at our development, the lowest 10% over the last 10 years have actually decreased in income, ignoring even inflation, real decrease. And that is very worrying. And that's why I felt with the increase in foreign workers levy, was it a government's attempt to do substitution? So if we increase the foreign workers levy to 400, indirectly, the employers will say, well, I don't mind paying a bit more to Singaporeans because I saved the 400. So I was quite surprised when our finance minister said that the increase in foreign workers levy was not an attempt in substitution. So I thought it was.
Can I just add on to that? I think middle income group, the sandwich class, well, I think in the past, it is true that they have not really benefited, from past budget measures, and yet at the same time, they are basically having to cope with higher cost of living, and when recession comes, they tend to be the one that get hit the most as well, because these are essentially white collar workers. But this time around, what I see is most significant, particularly for this so-called sandwich class, is the change in marginal tax rate. I think this change in marginal tax rate would have helped the middle income group quite substantially, because the lowest 20% percentile of the population's internal incomes, they do not really pay income tax. But I think the middle income tax, middle income households will actually benefit from this, and also the income tax rebate as well of 20%. I think that capped at 2,000. I think this will help the middle income group somewhat. And as for housing wise, I think we have talked quite substantially on that. The various type of housing. So I think. But I think the government is right to focus on the lower income group, because income gap is really widening. I've done an article in January before the budget about this budget. The title of my article was actually "Budget to Tackle the Gap," okay, because we are facing a widening income gap. As the economy continues to progress, especially at this kind of pace, there is structural change happening at a very rapid pace, and not everyone can adjust to that. All right. As industry continue to move up the value chain, demand for higher skilled workers increase rapidly. So therefore, the wages of higher skilled workers increase very rapidly as well. And that is the main reason that higher income earners, in terms of their income growth, is substantially higher than lower income earners. Because the lower income earners, essentially we are talking about people with, who are actually lower skilled, and hence face competition from foreign workers. But the demand for their skill, is getting lesser and lesser, because there is less and less industry that are reliant on, low-skilled workers, except for some industries who prefer to actually employ foreign workers because they are cheaper. So therefore, we are seeing this divergence in income level in Singapore. It is a trend that's been there for decades. It is happening all around the world with globalization. So therefore, we are not alone in fighting this widening income gap problem. Countries such as China is facing a rural-urban divide. Even in developed economies such as US is also facing this problem. But what I feel that as Singaporeans we should be grateful for is that at least the economy is doing well, fiscal position is very healthy, so we have those excess surplus to subsidize the low-income group. If we have not achieved strong growth, a healthy fiscal position, we will not be able to do that. So I think this is very important.
Yeah, and I would agree with that completely. That we need to do more, especially if you look at the aged population and the needy, the amount that in terms of benefits that we can give either them individually or organizations that are supporting the welfare organizations. I think we can do far more there. Coming back to Mr. Samilung, a question for you. If you look at the tax rebate, as the finance minister said, he said the tax rebate of $10,000 for corporates, and the SME cash grant, cash grant part of it, of 5% of revenue. He said it's just for YA 2011. Does that mean it's only for 1 year, or is it on a going forward basis, it's going to be reviewed every year?
Well, if we look at rebates, whether it is for individuals or for companies, it is on an annual basis. So this is for YA 11, and I don't think we will have it next year, because next year is not election year. So we may have it again in 5 years' time.
Right. So, and any reason, I mean, apart from it being an election year, and I also feel, if you look at the whole budget this year, and this is my own sentiment, is that increasingly we are seeing a lowering of tax incentives or tax benefits coming in via the budget. The focus seems to be growth, innovation, productivity, and that to my mind is the right way to go. Because over time, what you're seeing is, and from a government's perspective, the budget is basically laying down parameters for growth. And if you're saying that the focus is more on productivity, more on research and development, more on innovation, then I think that's the right way to go, and it should be less focused towards tax incentives and tax breaks. I think as a country, we pretty much are on the top, I would tend to believe, in terms of the incentives and the benefits that we give investors and companies who are operating out of Singapore. But coming back to from an EDB perspective and a policy making perspective, do you think budgets and the governments give you sufficient freedom and leeway in terms of encouraging you to have larger corporates come into Singapore, or have large SMEs of foreign countries come into Singapore? Do you think, my direct question would be, would a $400,000 or 400% tax break be an adequate incentive for an SME of another country to come into Singapore?